The scream echoed through the forest, sharp and desperate. Jack Miller's heart raced as he pushed his way through the dense underbrush, his boots sinking into the soft earth. What was that? The cry had to be real. Someone needed help. Without thinking, he quickened his pace, every muscle straining as he moved deeper into the unknown territory. This wasn't just another jungle. This was an alien world, far from home, where danger could be lurking in every shadow. The faint glow of distant fires flickered in the distance, casting eerie light over the twisted trees. The sounds grew louder, but so did the feeling of being watched. Jack's breath caught in his throat, his instincts screaming at him to be careful. Every step felt like it might be his last. He crouched low and approached the clearing cautiously, his mind racing. What he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. A girl, her skin glowed a vibrant shade of green, and her long, silver hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall. She was surrounded, bound by strange, primitive-looking ropes, struggling against the grip of what appeared to be alien warriors. Their bodies were massive, covered in tattoos and markings that spoke of a fierce culture. They were preparing something. Something Jack wasn't about to stick around to watch. His instincts kicked in. This was a rescue mission now. The girl's frantic eyes met his, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. Jack's hand moved instinctively to the blaster at his side, but it wasn't just the weapon that kept him calm. It was the knowledge that he could help. He had to. He wasn't about to leave anyone to their fate, especially not here. The alien girl's eyes widened as she saw him, a mix of relief and fear flashing across her face. She had no idea who he was, but the message was clear. She needed help, and fast. Jack took a deep breath, looking around for a way to break through. The warriors hadn't noticed him yet, still focused on their ritual, but that wouldn't last. He had only moments. He spotted a narrow gap between the trees, a place where he could slip through unnoticed. He took one more glance at the girl. She was looking directly at him now, pleading silently. His heart pounded as he took the first step. The air was thick with tension, but Jack wasn't backing down. This wasn't just some random rescue. This was something bigger. And Jack Miller, former soldier turned wanderer, wasn't about to walk away from it. Jack took a deep breath and stepped forward, moving as silently as possible through the underbrush. His eyes never left the girl. She looked so small, so fragile in the midst of the chaos surrounding her. The warriors were still oblivious to his presence, engrossed in their strange ritual, but Jack knew that wouldn't last long. Every step he took was calculated, deliberate. He had no room for mistakes. The dense foliage offered some cover, but it wouldn't hide him forever. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, the sound of wind rustling through the leaves mixed with the low murmur of the alien warriors' voices. He moved closer, heart racing, each heartbeat louder than the last. The girl's gaze never wavered from him. In that brief moment, he felt a connection, a silent understanding. She needed him. He was her only chance. Jack reached for the small pack on his back, pulling out a thin, flexible rope. He didn't have much to work with, but he'd make it count. His mind raced, calculating the best approach. If he could just get close enough to cut her free. He shifted to the side, his boots crunching softly underfoot. He cursed under his breath. The warriors turned briefly, their eyes scanning the surrounding area, but Jack froze, blending into the shadows as best as he could. His breath caught in his throat. This was it. The moment he'd been dreading and hoping for all at once. He couldn't afford to hesitate. As the warriors turned their attention back to the girl, Jack took another step, moving with the quiet precision that had kept him alive through countless battles. He was almost there. The girl was still struggling, but her movements were growing weaker. Her eyes flickered with exhaustion, but they still held that silent plea. Jack tightened his grip on the rope. He could see her more clearly now. Her glowing green skin shimmered faintly under the light of the campfire, her delicate features contorted in pain. Despite the dire circumstances, there was something beautiful about her, something that made Jack's chest tighten. He couldn't leave her behind. Not now. He was close enough now. Jack knelt down, his hands steady despite the pounding in his chest. He knew he had to act quickly. The rope was long enough to reach her restraints, and with a swift motion, he cut through the thick cords binding her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the girl gasped, her eyes wide in disbelief. The ropes fell away, and she was free. She slumped against the ground, her body trembling. But there was a look of relief in her eyes. Jack reached out, pulling her to her feet. "Come on," he whispered, his voice low. "We have to move." She nodded weakly, her feet unsteady as she stood, but there was no time to waste. The warriors hadn't noticed yet, but they would. Jack looked around. The shadows were closing in, and he could hear the rustle of movement. They had to get out, and fast. The girl took a shaky step forward, then another. Jack stayed close, guiding her through the dense forest, his heart still racing. They moved quickly, silently, the sounds of the warriors' voices fading behind them. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. He had no idea who these people were, or why they were after her, but one thing was clear. His life had just become far more complicated than he ever expected. Jack and the girl moved swiftly through the dense forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. The sounds of the tribal warriors searching for them grew fainter with every step they took, but Jack knew they couldn't afford to stop. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, looking for any signs of danger. The girl stumbled a few times, her legs shaky, but Jack was there to steady her each time. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low but filled with concern. She nodded, though her face was pale, her breathing shallow. "I'll be fine. Just keep moving," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Jack wasn't sure how much longer they could keep running, but he pushed the thought aside. They had to find safety first. The forest seemed endless, the trees towering above them, blocking out the dim light of the twin moons. Jack kept his pace steady, focusing on getting them both out of the immediate danger. The girl was struggling to keep up, and Jack's worry deepened. He had no idea who these aliens were or what they wanted with her, but one thing was clear: she was important. But important enough to risk everything for? He glanced at her, noticing the strange markings on her skin, glowing faintly in the moonlight. "What are they after you for?" he asked, his voice quiet but full of urgency. She hesitated, then looked at him, her eyes wide with something like fear. "You wouldn't believe me," she replied, her voice shaky. Jack didn't press her. She had her reasons. For now, their only focus was getting to safety. The forest eventually began to thin out, the trees giving way to a rocky cliffside overlooking a valley. Jack stopped for a moment to catch his breath, his heart still pounding in his chest. They were out of the immediate line of sight, but he knew it wouldn't be long before the tribal warriors found their trail. He looked over at the girl. "We need to keep moving. There's a cave just ahead. We'll rest there," he said. She nodded, though her face was filled with exhaustion. Jack gently helped her over the rocky terrain, the path now more challenging as they neared the cave. He kept a careful eye on their surroundings, knowing that they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. As they reached the entrance of the cave, Jack glanced behind them one last time. He thought he saw something moving in the shadows, but when he turned fully, it was gone. He shook his head, trying to focus on the task at hand. "Stay close," he said, leading her into the darkened cave. It wasn't much, but it would do for now. The girl leaned against the wall, her breathing still heavy, but she seemed to relax a little. Jack sat down next to her, his mind racing with questions. Who were these aliens? And why was she so important? What had she been running from? He didn't know, but he did know one thing. He was in this now, for better or for worse. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Jack sat in the dark cave, his back against the cold stone wall. The faint glow of the girl's skin illuminated the space around them, casting a soft light that contrasted with the shadows of the night outside. He glanced over at her, watching her catch her breath, her eyes closed in exhaustion. It had been hours since they escaped the tribal aliens, but Jack could still hear the distant sounds of their pursuit. He could feel the weight of the silence around them, pressing in, suffocating. The girl shifted slightly, her voice breaking the quiet. "They won't stop looking for me," she said, her voice trembling. Jack looked up, startled by the fragility in her tone. He had known this wasn't going to be easy, but he hadn't expected the depth of fear in her eyes. "Who are they?" Jack asked quietly. The girl hesitated, her fingers grazing the ground as she tried to steady herself. I don't know if I should say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I need to understand why they're after you. What's so important?" The girl looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing her options. Finally, she spoke. "I'm not just some runaway. I'm the last of my kind, she said, her words heavy with meaning. My people were wiped out in a war. I was supposed to be protected, but I was abandoned. Jack's mind raced as he processed her words. The last of her kind? The girl had no family left, no one to turn to. It explained the desperation in her eyes, the need to keep moving, to keep running. So you're a target because of who you are? Jack said softly. Because you're the last of your people. She nodded, her eyes lowered, as if she was ashamed of her own survival. Jack's heart tightened. You don't have to be ashamed, he said, his voice firm but kind. If they're coming after you, then they've made a mistake. I'm not going to let them get you. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also a flicker of doubt. I don't know if you can stop them, she said. They're powerful, and I don't think I can run forever. Jack's jaw clenched. He didn't have all the answers, but he wasn't going to leave her. I'm not running. And I'm not letting you run either, he said, his voice steady. We'll figure this out. Together. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their situation hanging in the air. Jack could feel the tension building. But something about the girl's presence made him believe they could make it through. He didn't know what would come next or how they would get out of this mess, but he knew one thing for sure. He was in this now. For better or worse. And he wasn't backing down. The girl's lips curved into a small, grateful smile. Thank you, she said quietly. Jack nodded, though the doubt still gnawed at him. The sounds of the night grew louder outside, the rustle of leaves and the distant howls of unknown creatures echoing in the air. But Jack didn't move. He stayed right where he was, watching over her, knowing that tomorrow would bring a new set of challenges. But for tonight, they were safe. And that had to be enough. The morning light filtered weakly through the cracks in the cave entrance, casting long shadows on the rocky walls. Jack stirred, rubbing his eyes as the chill of the early morning air seeped into his bones. He had barely slept, his mind racing through every possible scenario. The girl was still resting against the cave wall, her breathing steady but shallow. The events of the night before hung heavy in the air between them. Jack hadn't expected to find himself in this situation, protecting a girl he barely knew from an unknown enemy on an alien world. But here he was, and he wasn't about to back down now. He stood slowly, stretching his stiff muscles as he surveyed their surroundings. The valley below still looked peaceful, but Jack knew that peace was fleeting. They had to keep moving. There was no time to waste. He crouched down beside the girl, gently shaking her shoulder. Hey, it's time to go, he said softly. She opened her eyes, blinking against the morning light. Are we safe? She asked, her voice weak but hopeful. Jack hesitated. For now, he said, though he didn't fully believe it. But we can't stay here. She nodded, pushing herself to her feet with Jack's help. Her legs were still shaky, but she seemed determined. Jack could see the resolve in her eyes. Despite everything, she was still fighting. That was something he admired. As they gathered their few belongings, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. The forest around them felt too quiet, too still. He glanced over his shoulder, but saw nothing. He felt a flicker of unease, the sense that danger was closing in. Stay close, Jack said, keeping his voice low. The girl nodded, staying right by his side as they moved out of the cave and into the open. They climbed up the rocky terrain, heading for a narrow ridge that Jack hoped would give them a better view of their surroundings. As they reached the top, Jack paused, scanning the horizon. The valley stretched out below them, the dense forest broken only by a small stream that cut through the landscape. Everything seemed still, too still. He was about to turn and speak to the girl when he saw movement in the distance. A figure, cloaked in the shadows of the trees. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to see more to know they were being followed. He turned to the girl. We have to move, now, he said urgently. The girl's eyes widened in fear. They've found us, haven't they? She asked. Jack didn't answer. There was no time for answers now. They were too close. He grabbed her arm and started running, pushing through the dense brush as the sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. The sound of pursuit. The girl stumbled, but Jack kept pulling her along, not daring to stop. They had to get to the stream. He could lose them there. But as they reached the water's edge, Jack's heart sank. The stream wasn't as small as he had hoped. It was wide, fast-moving, and deep. There was no way they could cross it safely on foot. They had no choice but to keep moving along its edge, hoping for a better crossing point further downstream. Jack glanced behind them again. The figure was closer now, and Jack could see others moving in, spreading out. The chase was on. They didn't have much time. They had to find a way to escape, and fast. They moved quickly, the sound of rushing water filling their ears as Jack and the girl ran along the stream's edge, hoping to find a safe crossing point. The figure behind them was gaining ground, and Jack could hear the others calling to one another, their voices sharp and filled with urgency. The girl was struggling to keep up, her legs wobbling with every step, but Jack refused to slow down. They couldn't afford to. Stop. Jack glanced over his shoulder once more, his heart pounding as he caught sight of the figures closing in. The distance between them was shrinking fast. We need to find a way across, Jack muttered, his voice tight with anxiety. The girl's breathing was ragged, but she nodded, her eyes scanning the ground. They couldn't keep running forever. The current of the stream was too strong, the banks too steep to climb. There's a bridge up ahead, the girl said, pointing to a bend in the river where the water seemed to calm. Jack's gaze followed her finger. A bridge. It wasn't much, but it was their best shot. He grabbed her arm and urged her forward, the sounds of pursuit growing louder in the distance. They pushed through the thick underbrush, racing toward the bridge. As they neared the spot, Jack's stomach sank. The bridge was old, barely holding together, its wooden beams warped and cracked. It didn't look safe, but it was their only option. He turned to the girl. "Can you make it?" he asked, his voice firm but filled with concern. She looked at the bridge, her eyes flicking over the rotting wood. "I can try," she said, though her voice was uncertain. Jack nodded. "We don't have a choice. We have to move." Without another word, he stepped onto the bridge, testing the wood beneath his boots. It creaked but held. He motioned for her to follow. The girl hesitated for a moment, then slowly stepped onto the bridge behind him, her every movement cautious, deliberate. The bridge groaned under their weight as they made their way across, the sound of the wood straining beneath them sending a shiver down Jack's spine. He kept moving, not daring to look back. His only focus was getting across. The girl followed closely, her footsteps light, but Jack could hear her breathing, shallow and uneven. "Almost there," Jack said, trying to reassure her, though his voice was tight with worry. As they reached the middle of the bridge, the structure shuddered violently, a loud cracking sound echoing through the air. Jack froze, his heart stopping for a split second. The bridge was starting to give way. "Go," he shouted, pushing the girl forward as the wood beneath them began to splinter. She didn't need to be told twice. She ran, her feet pounding against the bridge as Jack followed closely behind. But just as they reached the far side, a loud snap echoed through the air. The bridge lurched, and one of the support beams snapped in half, sending a shower of splinters flying. Jack stumbled, losing his balance as the ground beneath him shifted. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. He reached out desperately, grabbing onto the girl's arm, pulling her toward him. The bridge was collapsing. With a final, desperate push, Jack pulled her to safety, both of them tumbling onto the solid ground just as the last of the bridge gave way, falling into the fast-moving stream below. Jack lay there for a moment, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They had made it, but they weren't safe yet. The sounds of pursuit were still close, and the girl's exhaustion was evident in the way she lay there, barely moving. "We have to keep going," Jack said, forcing himself to stand, though his legs felt like they were about to give out. "Can you walk?" The girl nodded weakly, her eyes filled with gratitude but also fear. Jack helped her up, his grip firm on her arm as they continued their journey, the threat of their pursuers still looming over them. The forest ahead seemed endless, but Jack wasn't about to let it swallow them. Not now. Not when they were so close to freedom. Jack and the girl moved quickly through the dense forest, their bodies pressed low against the ground as they continued to flee. Jack's eyes scanned the shadows, every rustling leaf or snap of a twig making him tense, expecting their pursuers to emerge at any moment. The girl's breathing was shallow, but she was keeping up, her movements growing steadier with each step. They had been running for what felt like hours, and Jack could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. Every minute they spent in the open brought them closer to danger. The sound of running water grew louder, and Jack could see the edge of the forest opening up ahead, revealing a wide clearing with a large rock formation. They had to get there. It was their best chance to regroup. "Keep up," Jack said quietly, glancing over at the girl. She nodded, her eyes focused ahead. The clearing was just a few more yards away, but as they neared it, Jack heard something, a faint sound, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. His senses went on high alert. Something was wrong. Without warning, the girl stopped in her tracks, her face frozen in fear. "They're close," she whispered. Jack turned, his heart racing. He scanned the trees, but he saw nothing. "We need to move," he urged, grabbing her arm and pulling her forward. But she didn't move. Instead, her eyes locked onto something in the distance, her expression changing from fear to something else, something more intense. Jack followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped. A figure was standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, its silhouette imposing against the backdrop of the trees. "Who was that?" Jack asked, his voice tight with unease. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "It's him, the one they sent after me." Jack's mind raced. Whoever this person was, they were no ally. The girl had said earlier that she was being hunted, but he hadn't realized just how close the danger was. "What do we do now?" Jack asked, his grip tightening on the girl's arm. She hesitated for a moment, then looked back at him, determination in her eyes. "We don't have a choice. We have to face him." Jack felt his heart rate quicken. The clearing wasn't safe, and neither was the forest. Their options were limited, but running was no longer an option. They were cornered. He glanced back at the figure, which was still standing motionless, watching them. "Are you sure?" Jack asked, his voice strained. The girl nodded. "It's the only way. I can't keep running forever." Jack took a deep breath, his mind racing as he tried to think of a plan. There was no way to know what kind of power the figure had, but they couldn't just stand there. They had to act. "All right," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "We move together. Stay close." The girl nodded, her eyes steely. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he slowly stepped forward, the girl beside him. They were walking straight toward the figure, and Jack could feel the tension building, the air thick with anticipation. As they got closer, Jack could see the figure more clearly. It was a humanoid, but its features were alien, strange in a way that made Jack's skin crawl. The eyes were dark and unblinking, and the figure's posture was stiff, almost mechanical. Jack could feel his pulse racing, his instincts screaming at him to prepare for whatever was about to happen. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching them with an unreadable expression. Jack's hand hovered near his sidearm, ready to react if necessary. The girl's breathing was slow but steady, her eyes never leaving the figure. She seemed calm, almost eerily so. Jack glanced at her, wondering what was going through her mind, but she didn't look back at him. Her focus was entirely on the figure in front of them. They were getting closer now, just a few feet away. Jack could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, the silence around them almost suffocating. The tension was unbearable. Then, finally, the figure spoke. "You should have run while you had the chance," it said, its voice low and cold. Jack's grip on his weapon tightened. The moment they had been dreading had arrived. There was no turning back now. The figure's cold, emotionless voice echoed in the clearing, sending a chill down Jack's spine. "You should have run while you had the chance." The words hung in the air, heavy with a sense of finality. Jack stood still, his grip tight on his weapon, but he didn't move. The girl beside him remained silent, her eyes fixed on the figure in front of them. Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He had to act, and he had to act fast. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his voice steady, though he could feel the tension in his muscles. "What do you want with her?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering Jack's question. Its dark eyes never wavered, never blinked. "I am the one sent to bring her back," it said simply. "She is not meant to be free." Jack's heart sank. The girl had been running from something far bigger than just a few tribal warriors. This figure, whatever it was a part of something far more dangerous. He looked over at the girl, her expression unreadable. "What does that mean?" Jack asked, his voice more forceful now. "Who are you working for?" The girl's eyes flickered, but she didn't speak. Jack's frustration was building. He had no idea who this figure was, but it was clear they weren't here to negotiate. They were here for her. He stepped forward, his hand still near his sidearm. "Listen, we're not going back with you," Jack said, his tone unwavering. "Not without a fight." The figure didn't respond immediately. It just stood there, its posture rigid, its gaze locked on Jack. Jack's hand clenched into a fist. He was prepared to fight, prepared to do whatever it took to protect her. But the figure's next words stopped him in his tracks. "You will not win," it said, its voice even colder than before. "You are outmatched." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't care about being outmatched. He would fight for as long as it took. But the girl, standing beside him, finally spoke. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "There is no fighting him. There's no winning." Jack turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? We can't just give up." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "You don't know who he is, or what he represents. You don't know what I am running from." Jack felt his heart race as he tried to process her words. There was so much he didn't understand, so much he needed to know. "Then tell me," he said urgently. "Tell me what's going on. I can't help you if I don't know what we're up against." The girl hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "I'm not just anyone," she said. "I'm the last of my kind, and they will stop at nothing to bring me back." Jack stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't just running from some random enemy. She was running from an entire system, something far more powerful than anything Jack had ever faced. "Who are they?" Jack asked, his voice low. "Who's chasing you?" She didn't answer at first. But then, in a quiet whisper, she said, "The Dominion. And they don't forgive." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The Dominion. He'd heard rumors, stories of a ruthless empire, stretching across the galaxy, crushing anything in its path. And now they were here, chasing her, chasing the last of her kind. Jack turned back to the figure, his mind racing. "So that's it. You're just going to take her back and end this." The figure didn't answer. It simply stepped forward, its presence looming over them. Jack's body tensed, ready to move, but the girl stepped in front of him. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not going back." Jack looked at her, seeing the resolve in her eyes. She was ready to fight, too. Together, they could do this. They had to. "Then let's make our stand," Jack said, his voice filled with determination. The figure's gaze softened, but it was still cold. "You do not understand the consequences of your actions," it said. "You cannot stop what is coming." Jack didn't care. "We'll see about that," he muttered, his hand tightening on the girl's arm. This wasn't over. Not yet. The figure's cold eyes never left them as Jack and the girl stood their ground. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of their choices pressing down on them like a storm ready to break. The figure's voice cut through the silence again, low and almost mocking. "You do not understand what you're up against. This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us." Jack's grip tightened on his weapon, but he didn't speak. The girl, still standing beside him, looked at the figure with defiance in her eyes. "I don't care how big it is," she said, her voice steady, though Jack could hear the quiet strength behind it. "I won't go back." The figure's lips twitched into a faint, almost pitying smile. "You think you can stop me?" it asked. "Stop the Dominion?" The girl's eyes never wavered. "I'm not stopping anything. I'm fighting for myself, for what's left of me. You can't take that away." Jack felt a spark of hope in her words, and for the first time since their encounter began, he wasn't sure that they were completely outmatched. The girl, though out of breath and clearly exhausted, wasn't giving up. She had come too far. Jack glanced over at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. It reminded him of the first time he'd met her, how he'd been unsure, not knowing if they would make it. But now, he was sure of one thing. They weren't done. The figure let out a soft laugh, though it held no humor. "This is futile," it said, its voice growing colder. "You can run, but you will never escape. The Dominion is inevitable. It will consume everything." Jack stepped forward, his voice firm. "We'll see about that." The figure's eyes narrowed, its stance shifting, as if preparing for something. Jack felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to change everything. The girl stood tall beside him, her face a mask of determination. For a brief moment, there was only silence between them. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the distant sounds of the jungle fading into a quiet, eerie calm. Jack could feel the weight of the moment. There was no turning back now. The figure's lips parted, its voice cold and final. "You will regret this," it said. Before Jack could respond, the girl stepped forward, placing herself between him and the figure. Her voice rang out with unshakable resolve. "Not today." Jack looked at her, seeing her strength, her courage. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was fighting for her future, for a chance to live without fear. Jack knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The figure paused, as if considering their defiance, before it finally spoke again. Then let it be so. With a swift, almost unnatural movement, it turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Jack stood frozen for a moment, his mind still processing what had just happened. Had they won? Or was this just another step in a much larger game? The girl, still standing firm, let out a slow breath, her shoulders slumping slightly as the tension eased from her body. Jack could feel the weight of everything that had happened, the fear, the uncertainty, all of it pressing down on him. But in that moment, standing beside her, he felt a flicker of hope. They had survived. For now. Jack turned to her, his voice softer than before. Are you all right? She nodded slowly, her eyes meeting his. I think so. The silence that followed felt different now, less oppressive. The danger wasn't gone, but they had won a small victory. Jack gave her a small smile, a rare moment of reassurance. We're not out of this yet, he said. But we'll figure it out. Together. She nodded again, her face softening just slightly, a flicker of relief in her eyes. Jack turned and glanced around at the jungle that surrounded them. Their journey was far from over, and the Dominion was still out there, waiting. But for now, they were together, and that was enough. As they moved forward, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming, something that would change everything. But he didn't fear it. Not with her by his side.